My brother's girlfriend forged a legal letter to steal my inheritance. So I've got a legal problem on my hands that also happens to be a family problem, which is always the worst kind. And I could really use some guidance because there's a lot of money on the line, and I'm scared I'm about to lose half of it. Let me start way back at the beginning. When my brother was 16 and I was just 4 years old, our grandmother set aside a share portfolio for the two of us. The idea was that as each of us got old enough, our piece would be transferred into our own accounts to do with as we saw fit. Now, my brother and I are very different people, and nothing shows that better than what each of us did with that gift. My brother got control of his part, and only about 4 years later, he dipped heavily into it and bought himself a brand new Honda. Just cashed a big chunk of it out for a car. Me, I did the opposite. I knew about my portfolio for years and years before it was actually mine. I got to watch it and understand it and see it grow from the time I was old enough to understand what it even was. And here's the thing that becomes really important. A big portion of that portfolio happened to be invested in Apple. So by the time I was finally given full control of it, it was already worth a genuinely ridiculous amount of money. Way, way more than what my brother had cashed out for his car. And honestly, I've been careful with it. My dad drilled it into me my whole life to leave it alone and let it keep growing until I'm 40-something. So mostly I do. I don't touch the principal. I let the investment itself keep compounding. But I'll be honest with you about the dividends. The dividends alone, the money the portfolio pays out just for existing, support a huge part of my life. That income has genuinely saved me more than a few times. When money got tight, when a plan fell through, it was always there to catch me. And I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like a spoiled person complaining about being too lucky. I'm aware of that, and I do sit with the discomfort of it. The fact that I got handed this incredible advantage that most people never get, and that I mostly just got it by being the sibling who didn't spend it. But I also can't pretend it hasn't shaped my entire adult life. That cushion is the reason I've been able to live the way I have. I've lived in 4 different states, all by my own choice, just following my curiosity, and I want to keep doing that. To keep moving and seeing more of the world before I ever settle down, if I ever even do. That freedom is the real inheritance. The money is just the thing that makes it possible. And now someone is threatening to cut it in half. Now, here's where the family part comes in, and it's the part that makes all of this hurt in a way that's hard to explain. I don't talk much with my brother. We're just not close. And we never really have been. He's done some pretty stupid things to the family over the years. Burned bridges, let people down, taken and taken. The kind of pattern where everyone loves him, but nobody really trusts him anymore. And on top of all that, because of our 12-year age gap, I didn't even really grow up alongside him. Think about it. When I was a little kid of 4 or 5, he was already a teenager on his way out the door. By the time I was old enough to actually form real memories, he was practically an adult and gone. So we never had that shared bedroom, grew-up-together bond that most siblings have. He's less like a brother I know deeply, and more like a relative I've heard a lot of stories about. Most of what I know about his life these days, I don't even get from him directly. I hear it all secondhand, filtered through our dad. I tell you all that, so you understand the strange distance in this. This isn't a close brother I had a falling out with. This is someone I share blood and a last name with, and not a whole lot else. But recently, my brother got a new girlfriend, and she works in law, and that detail matters, because a little while ago, I received a formal letter from the two of them. And this letter makes a claim. It says that the investments our grandmother made were designed to be for both of us to use, together, jointly, and not just for me alone. and it points out that my brother's share was only around $15,000, which, to be fair, is a true number. That's about what his was worth, but here's what they leave out. Mine was only worth that same $15,000 back at the same time, when he cashed his out. The only reason mine is worth so much more now is that I left it alone for years and let it grow while he spent his on a car, and what they want is half of the entire current value of my portfolio, right now. And my brother's girlfriend, the one who works in law, made it very clear in that letter that if I don't just hand them access, the legal fees and the fines will eat up my half too, and I'll be left with absolutely nothing. So that threat is what has me terrified. Genuinely terrified. Because if half of that portfolio disappeared, it would set me back years, not months, years. And the way they framed the whole thing, the message underneath the polite legal language, is basically a trap. Either you give us half willingly right now, or you fight us, lose, and end up with nothing at all. Give up half, or risk losing everything. That's the choice they're trying to force on me. And I keep reading that letter over and over, and every time, my stomach drops all over again, because I don't know if it's real. I don't know if a person who works in law and writes an official-looking letter actually has the power to do what she's threatening. I've never dealt with anything like this in my life. I just know that the thing that has quietly backed up my whole adult existence, the safety net that let me pick up and move states whenever I wanted, the cushion that caught me every time I stumbled, is suddenly being aimed at like a target by my own brother, and I have no idea if I'm about to lose it. So here's what I need to know. How likely is it that they actually win this and leave me with nothing? Because as far as I'm aware, there was never any paperwork, never any formal will. It was just my grandmother's spoken word about who got what. As for my share, I have all the logins. The trading accounts and the bank accounts are all in my name. The shares themselves are all solely in my name. So should I go find my own lawyer? And if I need one, what kind do I even need? I have an accountant I've used for years, but this doesn't feel like an accounting problem. It feels like a legal one. Update. Okay, I've got an update, and I'm relieved to say it's mostly good news. Let me walk you through everything, because a lot came out that I didn't know when I first posted. The first thing I did was sit down with my dad, and then, on your advice, I went and got my own lawyer. And once we started actually digging into the history of these shares, it turned out I'd had a big part of the story wrong. But the good news is, when you get the real story straight, it all comes out even better for me. So here's what actually happened. The portfolio that my brother and I inherited wasn't originally my grandmother's at all. It was originally my grandfather's. He was the money-savvy one in the family, the quiet one who understood investing long before it was trendy, the one who patiently built the whole thing up over a lifetime. And I love that I know that now, because it means this money isn't really about my brother and me at all. It goes back 2 generations, to a grandfather I'm told was careful and wise, who built something specifically so that his grandkids would have a foundation one day. After he died, my grandmother took over looking after those investments, guarding what he'd built. And she's the one who personally set up my brother's accounts and handed him control of his piece when he was old enough. Which, when you think about what my brother did with it, makes it a little sadder. My grandfather spent decades building that portfolio, and my brother turned his share into a Honda inside of 4 years. But here's the part I had wrong. I had always assumed my grandmother had set up my accounts too, and handed control to my dad before she passed away. That's not what happened. She didn't get the chance to do that for me before she died. Instead, my share was written into her will. She left everything she owned to my dad, with a specific instruction. The instruction was that the amount that had been worth $15,000 back when my brother got his equivalent share would go to me when I was old enough to know how to take care of it properly. And here's the thing that really matters. There was no formal trust set up, no complicated legal structure. My grandmother simply trusted my dad to do the right thing. She just trusted him. And you know what? My dad did do the right thing. Every bit of it. He set up the accounts for me. He gave me full control 6 years ago, exactly as she wanted. And then he did something I didn't even fully appreciate until I was sitting there in the lawyer's office hearing it all laid out. He put some of his own shares into my account too, as an extra leg up for me. My dad quietly made my gift bigger out of his own pocket, and never once made a thing of it. Never mentioned it. I'd been living off the dividends of my father's own quiet generosity for 6 years and hadn't even known the full extent of it. That one got me a little choked up, honestly, because here I was, panicking about a brother trying to take money from me, and the whole time the real story was about a dad who kept quietly giving me more than I ever realized. It reframed the entire thing for me. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was years of my father looking out for me without ever asking for a word of thanks. So that's the foundation. Now, my dad also finally told me the piece of the puzzle I'd been missing this whole time, how my brother even found out my portfolio had grown so much in the first place. It turns out that last year, my brother had come to our dad asking for money, and this wasn't the first time. Dad had bailed him out financially several times over the years, and at some point he'd just had enough of it. So this time, Dad chewed him out. And in the middle of that lecture, to make his point about how my brother should have been handling his money all along, Dad used me as the example. He basically said, "Look at your sibling, who left their inheritance alone and let it grow instead of blowing it on a car." And that's how my brother found out. That's the whole origin of this. My brother learned, from that lecture, that I still had my shares and that they'd grown into something substantial. And I guess that planted the seed. That's the moment all of this started. So, armed with all of that real history, my lawyer looked at everything and told me plainly that I am completely in the clear. The shares are legally solely mine, exactly as my grandmother intended and my dad executed. But here's the wild part. It was never even going to get to the point of proving that in a courtroom, because it turned out my brother's girlfriend, the one who works in law, the one who signed that threatening letter, was only a legal secretary. And I say was past tense for a reason, because the law firm she worked for got in touch with my lawyer, and they apologized, and they informed us that she had been terminated immediately, fired on the spot. Because that letter I received? It had been doctored. She had edited it to place her own name in a position far more senior than she actually was, and she'd changed some of the contact information on it too. The whole thing was a forgery she cooked up using her employer's letterhead, and her employer was not happy about it. So the big scary legal threat that had me losing sleep for weeks was, essentially, a fake. A legal secretary in over her head, forging a document on her employer's letterhead, dressing herself up as some senior legal authority, all to try to frighten me into simply handing over a fortune without a fight. And I want you to know the mix of feelings that hit me when my lawyer told me that. First, this enormous wave of relief, because the thing I'd been terrified of turned out to be a paper tiger, literally a fake piece of paper. But right behind the relief came something colder, because it meant this was never some legitimate legal disagreement about what our grandmother intended. This was a straight-up con. My brother and his girlfriend didn't think they had a real claim and take it to court in good faith. They knew they had nothing, so they manufactured a threat, forged a document, and tried to scare their own family member out of a life-changing amount of money. That's a very different thing. That's not a misunderstanding between brothers. That's a crime aimed at me by someone who's supposed to be family. And it gets sadder from there, because about a week after she got fired, my brother showed up at my door, begging for money. And the full picture finally came out. His girlfriend is in serious debt, deep in it. And she had taken a gamble. She bet that she could scare and scam a chunk of cash out of me, and she lost that bet, and now they were more desperate than ever. And I've got to be honest with you about how that felt, because it wasn't the clean, satisfying moment you might expect. I felt awful, genuinely awful. Here was my own brother, standing on my doorstep, begging me for help, and I was saying no, over and over. And no matter what he'd done, no matter how distant we were, there's something that just breaks in you a little when you have to look a sibling in the eye and turn them away while they're desperate. He's still my brother. We came from the same parents, and some deep, old, wired-in part of me was screaming that you're supposed to help family, that blood is supposed to mean something. And I'll be honest, if it had been different, I think I would have caved. If he had just come to me from the start, honestly, as a brother, and said, "Look, I'm in trouble. I need help," instead of wrapping it all up in a forged legal letter and a scam designed to frighten me, I might have given him something real. And if the amount hadn't been this enormous, desperate figure, well into 5 figures, most of it to cover his girlfriend's debts rather than anything of his own, I might have found a way. Some genuine part of me wanted to help my brother. I stood there in my own doorway, feeling like the villain in my own story, even though I knew, logically, that I wasn't. But then the next morning happened. I walked outside and found that every single one of my tires had been slashed, all 4 of them, slashed in the night. So, screw him, I don't feel bad anymore. And I mean that. That was the thing that finally closed the door in my heart, and honestly, it was almost a relief when it clicked shut. Because for weeks, I'd been tormenting myself with guilt, feeling like a bad brother, a bad person, a selfish rich sibling hoarding money while family suffered. All that weight. And then he went out in the dark and slashed all 4 of my tires because I wouldn't fund his girlfriend's debt. And just like that, all the guilt drained out of me. Because a person who comes to you begging for help one day and then quietly destroys your property in the night the moment you say no has told you the complete truth about who they are. There was no more confusion about whether I was being unfair to him. He answered that question for me himself, with a knife and my tires. I finally, fully believed him. And you can't grieve a relationship you were never actually going to be allowed to have. There's one more thing I took away from all of this, and it's less about my brother and more about me. Reading through all the advice people gave me on my original post, I realized something a little uncomfortable about myself. I don't actually know nearly enough about what I'm doing with these shares, or the dividends, or money in general. And that's a strange thing to admit when you're sitting on a portfolio worth what mine is worth. Because here's the truth. Most of the good decisions I've made with this money weren't really my decisions at all. They were my dad's. Every smart move, every time I resisted the urge to cash out, every reason I left it in Apple all these years, that was me doing what my father told me to do. And his advice has paid off spectacularly, but not because I understood the reasoning behind it. Just because I trusted him blindly and genuinely had no idea what I was doing on my own. I've basically been a passenger in my own financial life, and I got lucky that the person driving knew where he was going. And this whole ordeal made me realize how dangerous that is. Because my dad won't always be here to steer for me. If I don't actually learn how any of this works, then the next time someone comes at me, whether it's a scam like my brother's or just a bad decision of my own, I won't be equipped to protect myself. My grandmother's instruction was that this money should go to me when I was old enough to know how to take care of it. And the honest, humbling truth is that I'm not sure I ever fully got there. I inherited the money without inheriting the knowledge to handle it. So I've decided to change that. I've booked in to start working with a financial advisor to actually sit down and learn how all of this works and how to make the most of what I've been given, with my own understanding instead of just blind trust. It feels like the first genuinely grown-up decision I've made about this money in my life. Thanks for all your comments, everyone. This whole thing turned out okay in the end, but it opened my eyes in a lot more ways than just the legal one. I found out who my brother really is, and I found out how much I still have to learn about standing on my own 2 feet.